mandate, the CGE provides technical advice and support to developing country parties and facilitates improved reporting over time in relation to the preparation and submission of national communications, biennial update report, and the upcoming biennial transparency report next year. As part of transition from the existing MRP arrangement to the ETF, support for developing countries is critical to facilitate a successful implementation. On one hand, developing country parties have expressed in their national transparency report the lack of quality data for transparency reporting, especially the production of national GHG inventories. National experts also share their difficulties in collecting data from data providers at various CGE events and interviews, among which some data providers are not party stakeholders. Furthermore, non-party stakeholders have also expressed it is challenging to find entry points to contribute to global climate action and work with their national government. These difficulties could be caused by low awareness level, lack of capacity, and confidentiality concern. In that context, this side event aims to showcase CGE support to developing countries with a focus on its recent published material and capacity building activities. Secondly, provide a platform to parties and non-party stakeholders to share views and experience on collecting data in order to chart a way forward to improve reporting under the enhanced transparency framework. And in the end, this event will also collect feedback on CGE's support to developing countries and your preference for topic of 2024 CGE capacity building activities. First, we will listen to the opening remark from Mr. John Cooper, Director of the Transparency Division from the Secretariat, and the Professor Xiang Gao, the Chair of the CGE. Then, we will dive into the presentation of a CGE system and upcoming CGE support to developing countries. Then, if we have time and our colleague from South Africa can join us, we will have a presentation to share their experience in collecting data, or we will continue with the panel discussion with some distinguished inviters, CDP Latin America and World Business Council for Sustainable Development on their views of promoting data collection for Paris Agreement and collaboration between governments and non-party stakeholders. Following the panel discussion, we will have a short Q&A session, and before we close, a 5-minute Mentimeter exercise. So wait to the end because this is very important for us. At the closing, we will have a chance to listen to the SBI Vice Chair, Mr. Gonzalo Guayquil, for his closing remark. I would like to reiterate the importance of this event, and the outcome of the discussion could inspire us on how to promote collaboration between party and non-party stakeholders for data collection, and as well as guide of the CGE on how to efficiently support and strengthen this collaboration. I encourage you to participate in the Mentimeter exercise again, and take the floor during the Q&A session. Enjoy the discussion. Now, let us start. I would like now to invite Mr. Don Cooper, Director of the Transparency Division, for his welcoming remark. Don, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I've been trying for years to get our people to try and speak and write in one of the UN languages at least. The title for this meeting is Promoting Data Collection for Paris Agreement, a CGE Dialogue for Parties and Non-Party Stakeholders. They're improving, but really, what the heck does that mean? To me, it's absolute gobbledygook, you know, and I'm part of the process. So one day, in my mind, it boiled down to talking and supporting. Doesn't matter who you talk to, doesn't matter who you support. Just those things. And a key component of talking, I have found, is listening. It's amazing how much of an advantage you can get when you are not the one talking, when you are the one listening. I remember in my younger days, I was part of CBD, not Secretariat. I was the rapporteur, and I was asked to lead the process on the budget. And we were meeting in Brazil. And they gave me a representative of the Brazilian government to provide all my technical guidance and support. And that guy was absolutely brilliant. I've never come across somebody more educated, well-rounded, etc. than him. What did you guys do with him, by the way? I hope he's still a part of the process, but it impressed me. And I have been similarly impressed with the effort by the CGE, the Secretariat, regional groups, private sector, all of them over the last 3-4 years. And yes, that does include COVID. The amount of work that was done was ridiculously large. We went from thinking addressing 400 or 500 people in a year as being a good year to doing that in the thousands and still considering where do we go from there. So the vehicle in which we can talk is there. So what we have to do is to ensure that all the people who want to talk can get on board the vehicle. Then those clever people, just like those people from Brazil, will then set the topics for which we talk. One of the biggest topics for talking is what do we do under this implementation phase of the Paris Agreement. I do not like to reference submissions of biennial transparency reports under the Enhanced Transparency Framework because it really does not have any meaning. The submission of the report was never an objective. It's what's done with the information that comes that's important. And for countries, what you did nationally to put yourself in a position to submit the information. You had to have generated a massive amount of knowledge about what happens in your country. What impacts it? Where is it vulnerable? Where do you need assistance? Is it money? Money. What kind of money? Is it a grant? Is it a loan? Is it an investment? Right? Is it a partnership? Right? Is it debt forgiveness to reduce outgoing from the national budget? What is it? And if you think that it is investment, after you had the investment, 2-3 years later, did it work? So it is this knowledge that you gain, this management insight over how your country functions. Oh yeah, you can submit the BTR because with that knowledge you can just fill in the boxes anyway. Right? So it is not the BTR. It's being able to do it. And a key point we want to emphasize that the CGE has been teaching over the past several years, it is not the best report in the world. It's the best one you can produce now. Right? And for every country in the world, whether you are mine, the Bahamas, or our host, Germany, that way I don't insult anybody, it is going to be the worst BTR you ever submit, most likely. Because no matter how good it is, you are going to get so much better by the time you do the second one. By the time you get to the third one, you're probably an expert. Right? So we are encouraging you to use the opportunity to generate your national capability to understand. And you don't understand everything. Understand what you can understand. Next time round, you'll understand more. Right? The CGE has made it one of its priorities to bring together all of us, all of our friends, cousins, aunties, dry cleaner down the road, everybody, so that we can engage and find better ways of generating that national knowledge. Because that national knowledge puts you in a position to be as ambitious as you possibly can to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. It also lets you know what your national industry, your huge philanthropic agencies are doing. They can feed back. One of the biggest leaps we had going into Paris when we agreed the Paris Agreement was that a number of developed countries were able to be far more ambitious than they thought they would be able to, because their understanding of where their industry were and what their industry's targets were better. They were aiming for a 6, and industry was telling them to go for a 12. So they could come forward and be very noble and show the world how good they are and say, we will commit to a 12. Yes, because they had the dialogue. So for all of us, we are encouraging you, use that knowledge building exercise through all of the partnership and dialogue, the cooperative development, the cooperative understanding, having coffee, everything, to maximize your knowledge. That is the power that allows the planet to survive into future generations. So I know I'm preaching to the converted, but it still feels good occasionally to do a little bit of preaching. And to ask you to please keep everything in perspective. All of your governments agree to the goals of the Paris Agreement. It's not a discussion. How you get there is. Right? How much I can do is a discussion. Right? So whenever you do any action that generates information or data or builds capacity, remember it's for a reason. Submitting the BTR is not a reason. Right? It's the thing you have to do to accomplish the reason. The reason is you need to know what's going on. Right? I'm going to leave you with this one that I can't remember who told it to me, or maybe I invented it, I don't know. You cannot buy or sell, in other words, trade, anything if you cannot count it. Right? We take it for granted. I need 6 apples, they're going to cost me €5. Here is my €5, here are your 6 apples. We have a mechanism for determining that that is 6 apples, and we have a mechanism for determining that that is €5. So, in the climate world, you need exactly the same thing. I will take these actions, you will provide this support. How do you track either of them? How do you determine that one came and it was effective, or it didn't come? Of the 100 billion, which this year might actually happen, right? How much of it went to each of your countries, and where did it go in your country? What did it do? Was it the right format? Are you able to count it? Right? To say, no, sorry, that was not the effective thing. Or, yes, I need more of this one and less of that one. Right? This is what the knowledge, the transparency, the data submission, the data gathering does for you. It gives you power. And remember, the biggest advocates for transparency is not the group of countries who insisted on the reporting at the beginning of the convention. but a group of countries that they insisted had to report. Those are the ones who are the biggest supporters of transparency. Well, until many of the developing countries began to realize how much value there is in understanding what's going on, and they're just as big a supporter. So with that, I turn you over to our valued CGE members who have just done an absolutely incredible job. I really feel sorry for our new chair because the bar is so high. I mean, he has to jump just to touch the bottom and maybe even use a trampoline. But fortunately, we really invested in a good guy this time. I'm glad he's not able to hear us because he might take this personally and think that we think the world of him, even though we do. So just keep this between us and don't let him know. So with that, I'm going to run to facilitative sharing of views where my boss says thou shalt be at 1:30. And my boss orders, so I do. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your work. Now, quickly, I would like to invite Professor Xiang Gao, Chair of the CGE, to give us some word. Gao, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Donna. I hear you very clearly. And dear friends, pleasant good afternoon in Bonn. And this is the first time I missed the Bonn session. I miss you very much. And for me, this is a very pleasant evening in Shenzhen, in China. And I would like to take this time to recognize and thanks the Director of Transparency Division, Mr. Donald Cooper, and his team for the continuous support from the Secretariat to the CGE. As introduced by Jenny, the CGE has contributed significantly in supporting developing countries to implement transparency provisions under the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement since 1999. And we know under the Paris Agreement, the enhanced transparency framework plays a pivotal role in tracking progress and ensuring that countries are on track to achieve their NDCs. The CGE conducted the transparency needs assessment during past years, and the results continued to highlight the importance of collaboration between national governments and the non-party stakeholders in collecting and sharing data to inform our understanding of national and global climate action. This side event aims to serve as a platform to discuss our collective efforts and provides an opportunity for meaningful dialogue between party and non-party stakeholders while fostering collaboration and knowledge exchange. By working together, we can identify challenges, share best practice, and explore innovative approach to improve transparency arrangement and processes. We fully understand 1 hour is far, far from enough, but let us seize this opportunity to strengthen partnership, foster collaboration, and pave the way for more inclusive and effective climate action and support. I thank you all for your presence here today, and we look forward to the presentations and discussions. Thank you, Jenny, and I'll give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Gao, and thank you, Don, wherever you are. So now, since Sandra can't join us, I would like to go directly to the presentation of my fellow colleague from the CGE, Victoria. Please proceed. You're Victoria Novikova, part of the CGE member. So I welcome you to give us some presentation, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Jenny, and good afternoon, colleagues. In my presentation, I'll give an overview of CGE support that provides to developing countries. As you know very well, the Consultative Group of Experts is the primary body to provide technical assistance and advice to developing countries in the process and the preparation of climate change transparency reports. In doing so, we produce a variety of knowledge products. We conduct on an annual basis capacity building needs assessment. We actively engage in knowledge delivery, collaboration, and engagement with a variety of stakeholders. Next slide, please. In terms of capacity building needs assessment, the CGE conducts on an annual basis an assessment of the existing and emerging needs and gaps of developing countries in relation to the meeting the preparation of the transparency reports in terms of implementing the existing MRV arrangements under the Convention and preparing for the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement. And the CGE prepares a technical paper that conducts the results of the capacity building needs assessment. The information that CGE draws upon when preparing this technical paper is the information reported by developing countries in their national communications, biennial update reports, and the summary reports of the biennial update reports, the summary reports of the technical analysis of the biennial update reports. To supplement this information, the CGE also conducts an annual survey of party stakeholders. In addition to preparing the technical paper in the UNFCCC format, the CGE also prepares a distilled version of the technical paper where it provides a visualization of information contained in the technical paper in the UNFC format. And when conducting capacity building needs assessment, one of the prominent gaps identified by the CGE is the gap related to collecting data and information for transparency reporting. For this reason, the side event aims to provide the platform for CGE members, national governments, non-party stakeholders engaged in the provision of data, in the collection of data, to discuss together ways of promoting data collection for the enhanced transparency framework and tracking progress in implementation of the goals of the Paris Agreement. CGE produces a variety of knowledge products, and the most recent one, produced in the year 2022 and 2023, include the following one: updated versions of training materials on vulnerability and adaptation assessment, updated versions of training materials on mitigation assessment, second edition of the technical handbook for developing country parties on preparing for implementation of the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement, 7 new case studies and interviews on institutional arrangements, and 2 short animations on institutional arrangements. All of these materials are available at the CGE website for download. CGE also actively engaged in knowledge delivery, and since the year 2004, on a regular basis, CGE conducts regional training workshops in all key regions of developing countries and conducts these workshops in the UN languages predominantly spoken in these regions. Documents of the past training workshops are available at the CGE website for download, and there is a web link in this presentation. The presentation will be uploaded to the side event website, which you can access and access the links provided in this presentation. Since the year 2018, CGE also conducts regional webinars, and recording of past webinars are also available at the CGE website, and I would like to invite you to access this website, these webinars. There is a lot of information that is very useful for transparency work that you conduct. In the year 2023, CGE has been conducting 3 regional training workshops from April to September this year, with a focus on reporting on information on climate change impacts and adaptation, and support needed and received in relation to adaptation reporting. The upcoming workshop will take place in September. In addition to that, the CGE also conducts 3 regional webinars from July to August this year that will focus on shining the spotlight on CGE training materials for reporting on climate change mitigation. And I would like to invite you to join these webinars and listen to the information that we will provide. Finally, CGE actively collaborates and engages with different stakeholders. On an annual basis, CGE organizes informal forums and CGE side events where we bring together all stakeholders to seek your feedback on our work, to brainstorm together on key factors to enable successful implementation of the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement and the existing MRV arrangements under the Convention. The CGE also shares all information on activities, on technical materials that it develops on the dedicated website. So there is a CGE website, which is part of the UNFCCC website, that you can access to download all the information that I described in this presentation. There is also an MRV Transparency Help Desk, and there is a web link that you can access to and receive support on your transparency-related questions. If you have a LinkedIn account, I would like to invite you to join the LinkedIn Transparency Group that is maintained by the CGE. This will help you access up-to-date information on the technical materials, on events, on webinars in a very quick manner. And those who have a Facebook account, I would like to invite you to subscribe to our Transparency Facebook webpage, where we also share a lot of information in a succinct manner, and information is up to date. Finally, CGE actively collaborates with other expert groups and constituted bodies under the Convention and the Paris Agreement, as well as intergovernmental and international organizations, in order to provide more comprehensive and up-to-date support to developing country parties. And with this, I'll finish my presentation and give the floor back to Jenny, our moderator.
Thank you, Victoria. Gerald, if you have any questions to the CGE, please take them during the Q&A session after the panel discussion, please, because we are a little run out of time. Now let's move to the panel discussion. And today we have, Miriam Garcia from CDP Latin America and Louis Hill from World Business Council of Sustainable Development. And we also will continue with you, Victoria, from the CGE member. And now we will listen to each panelist to hear their insight on collecting and providing data from non-party stakeholders, such as the private sector, for climate actions and reporting. We will also have the chance to hear their success stories, lessons learned, and challenges. So now, please let me give the floor to Miriam. Please, Miriam, briefly introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Miriam Garcia. I'm Associate Director for Policy Engagement for Latin America, based in São Paulo, but covering all Latin America. First of all, I would like to thank the UNFCCC Secretariat for the invitation and my panel colleagues for the enriching discussions and very relevant. Before joining CDP Latin America, I was working as an academic on the topic of accountability and transparency for non-party stakeholders' commitment. Talking about that in 2019 was almost as pointing out an elephant in the room. People were avoiding that discussion. Fast forward to 2023, and it's all about accountability, credibility, integrity of non-party stakeholders' engagement, and how to connect that with parties, which is great and very impressive how fast it moved the agenda. When we analyze non-party stakeholder data, I think of corporate data, subnational governments, so cities, states, regions, but also financial institutional data. It's important to recall there are several types of accountability. There is market accountability, there is peer-to-peer accountability, there is accountability to initiatives that those non-party stakeholders are part of, and there are several also types to monitor and acknowledge those commitments. But they all start at the same point, which is disclosure. We all need disclosure and transparency of non-party stakeholders' voluntary commitments to make sure that we can track and then later integrate into global analysis, regional analysis, or national analysis. Our goal today is to talk about the next phase of disclosure. Now that the CDP is here to support you to make the disclosure to the next phase, having all this data, what we should do in terms of integration for national government. As you probably know, CDP is the world's largest climate data platform. We are an official data provider to the UNFCCC Global Climate Action Portal, and our data support decision-making process in capital markets and private governance structures. But it's not only about private decision-making. CDP theory of change is based on the ambition loop. CDP strongly believes that there is a positive feedback loop in which non-party stakeholders' leadership by establishing science-based targets, by adopting transition plan, could be also beneficial for government, for the development of public policies. In an all-hands-on-deck approach or all-society approach, non-party stakeholders can support parties to take climate action to the next level required by science. So how can CDP data that continues to increase globally can support the design and elaboration of public policies that is evidence-based? In 2019, CDP Latin America signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation with several goals: case studies, research, joint events, but most importantly, data sharing of companies disclosing to CDP in Brazil. Here is relevant to emphasize that the growth rate of Brazilian companies publicly disclosing to CDP their environmental information has increased 50% over the past years. So CDP Climate Questionnaire, which is 100% TCFD aligned for those who work on the finance here in the room, provides access to data not only related to GHG emissions, but also corporate climate governance, risks and opportunities, targets, and indicators for transition plan, among others. Biodiversity as well for those countries like Brazil, which is a very relevant thematic. CDP data was integrated into the Brazilian ministry program called SIRENE, which stands for National Emissions Record System. SIRENE is the Brazilian official instrument for making available the results of the country's greenhouse gas emissions. The ministry identified CDP corporate data on GHG emissions as including its historical series as a match to SIRENE. We conducted data sharing with the ministry last year, so companies that have disclosed to CDP since the adoption of the Paris Agreement in 2015 until 2022. CDP data was integrated into SIRENE module that has a corporate model and was launched in COP27 last year. As CDP provides access to standardized, comparable, and aligned data with the most relevant standards and frameworks, its integrations enables Brazil government to explore how corporate climate action has evolved in Brazil in the past years since the adoption of the Paris Agreement. We are also in work in Latin America with the Colombian government to do another data sharing of CDP data, now using to identify potential implementation of climate finance programs. So you can see CDP data can be connected to different needs of the parties in terms of designing and implementing public policies. If at the global and intergovernmental levels, there are different ways we can use and analyze non-party stakeholder data, it can be individually, collectively, and assess our progress to achieve the Paris Agreement goal. It's also extremely important to say that parties can benefit from the integration of non-party stakeholders' data into their public policy cycles and into their NEDCs. As Don said before, non-party stakeholder data provide a photo of the efforts that your corporate and subnational governments are doing in your jurisdiction and will help you parties to do the homework to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. Just to finalize, I would like also to say that CDP offers a specific tool for policymakers, which is called the Government Dashboard, where you can explore non-party stakeholder data at the global and national level. So I invite you all to have access to that amazing tool and contact us if you should require any further information about NPS data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for this insight in the role of the data collector. Like building the bridge between the national government and data provider. I would like to ask you, from your experience, what kind of enable environment is required to facilitate the effective data collection process? And maybe if you can mention also the main challenges as a data collector in terms of collecting and managing data with the government. Please.
So answering to the first question, I think one of the challenges that we had doing the data sharing, it's on how the way CDP collects data and the way governments interpret data. So the way we did is we did a 2-day workshop explaining how CDP data is collected, how can be aggregated, how this can be connected to the way the government was using data and everything. So it's not only about sending a file of the data, but having this learning process together. And I would like to thank you very much the Brazilian Ministry of Science and Technology and Innovation for being pioneering in terms of non-party stakeholder data aggregation, but also being so collaborative in a way of making sure that we could be all together doing that. I think another point is to make sure that we have more data. If we have more companies and subnational governments disclosing, this would provide a bigger picture, a big number of individual cases that aggregated could provide a better picture of climate action within a jurisdiction. So working together for the governments to endorse the non-party stakeholder disclosing process, or parties calling their non-party stakeholders to be more transparent, this also is a positive feedback loop.
Thanks a lot, Miriam, for your insight. And now I would like to introduce Lewis Hill from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Lewis, please. We would like to hear your insight in this topic as well, from the perspective of the business community and how they perceive the importance of action against climate change and providing data to support this effort, please.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the CGE, the UNFCCC for the invitation. It's great to be here. And also thanks, Miriam. Great to hear those insights and the work that you're doing in Latin America. Maybe just to start with, just to give you a little bit of background about who the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is. Aside from having an incredibly long name, we do also have a global business community of around 220 of the world's largest multinationals, and we are CEO-led. And they work together across the 3 sustainability imperatives of our time. The first is obviously climate change, the second, nature loss, and the third is growing inequality. In terms of the importance of the private sector, the recent IPC synthesis report set out how the role that the private sector can play in engaging in flexible and realistic pathways towards the 1.5 degree C trajectory that we need to be on. And we also know that for a number of countries, the private sector accounts for the majority of emissions, in some cases up to 70%. So the private sector and business plays an incredibly important role on this decarbonisation journey that we're all on. And in order to do that, it needs to be able to provide fit-for-purpose information to inform governments and to inform investors in order to take those better decisions to manage their carbon performance. And that is something that we at WBCSD have been working on a lot in the last 18 months, along with our leading business members. And we have sort of taken a lot of what is already out there. There are a lot of existing initiatives that have been doing some fantastic work on a voluntary basis. And we have put them together in what we term the corporate performance and accountability system for carbon. And there may be a visual that pops up behind me, but if not, no worries. I can talk you through it. And it's a 4-stage process that leading companies are really already engaging in. And it is calculating their baseline emissions already in order to set a net zero target. And obviously we have the likes of the Science Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI, that is absolutely the sort of gold standard for setting science-based targets. Increasingly developing transition plans to inform how they are going to achieve those targets. Conducting routine accounting for their carbon performance through the likes of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol that has been around for 2 decades, which the World Business Council co-convened with our friends at the World Resources Institute. And then finally, of course, reporting and disclosure, CDP playing an incredibly important role within that sphere. That system at the moment, as I said, is largely voluntary. And the process to go through it, to set that target, to set up your plan, to account, and then to report and disclose, can be very onerous for companies for a multitude of different reasons, from standards not aligning, for a lack of interoperability in data that's being provided. And that is actually a real barrier to entry in terms of being able to have a system that is fit for purpose, that has information flowing through it, that can then inform the decisions that governments are taking and that investors are also taking. So in 2023, the World Business Council, with our business members, we've undertaken a new project, which is to consult with not only the business community, but also with the broader ecosystem that is already part of the performance and accountability system, to understand two things. Number one, what are the main pain points? What are the main barriers that are preventing corporates from being able to provide this information in a frictionless way? And number two, what are some proposed solutions to overcome that? How can we work together? How can we engage in dialogue to start overcoming some of these pain points, to develop a system that is more free-flowing and more fit for purpose? We have a vision that at the moment, if you have, say, a few thousand companies who on a voluntary basis can flow through this system, we want hundreds of thousands of companies to start flowing through this system, because that's going to provide a better quality level of information that is going to drive better decision-making, not only for governments when they're setting policy. I think Miriam mentioned the ambition loop. That is, again, something that we see, of course, we see as well. Not only will it help them make better decisions for policy making, but it will also guide capital allocation decisions towards those companies that are really taking progress on net zero. So I will stop there.
Thanks, Luis. I would like to ask you one brief question, but it is an important question. How can an effective information system, according to you, inform government decision-making and contribute to climate action and reporting?
Sure. So I think we really see, this system, I think, will actually almost lead to what we're calling a virtuous circle of better decision-making. So if you take a company, for instance, if a company, if some of the challenges that we have within this current system, for example, the granularity of emissions data for Scope 3, then there's a lot of work that's already underway to improve that. If they have better granularity over the data, over their carbon footprint, they can start to drive better decision-making internally. Oh, there's the system. There we are. That's basically what I talked you through verbally, but feel free to take a picture. So that can drive better decision-making internally. And that, therefore, will inform governments, I think, in two ways. We've seen, the likes of the Inflation Reduction Act and the EU Green Deal, that governments are starting to deploy incentives to drive decarbonisation in certain sectors, particularly heavy emitting sectors. Having that fit-for-purpose information will enable them to deploy those subsidies, to deploy those tax breaks in areas where they can really double down on the progress that has already been made. And I think that will therefore support policy making, and it will also support governments when they come to update their NDCs. When they have that sort of fit-for-purpose information from corporates, they can understand the contribution that the private sector is making within their specific within their specific country as they come to set their next NDCs, I think just before COP30. And then I think just finally as well, there's another element here, which are financial institutions. So the capital markets have a really important role. I think, honestly, probably the kind of biggest transformational role that could be played in this decarbonisation journey is through financial institutions and the capital markets. If they have fit-for-purpose information from companies to understand their carbon performance, they can start to direct investments within their portfolios towards those companies, towards those sectors that are really making progress on their targets, as opposed to those who don't. But they need that information in order to be able to make those decisions.
Thank you, Luis. And I would like to welcome Sandra, one of our CGE members. I cannot pronounce your surname, Sandra, so please introduce yourself. And I would like to ask you to give us also some insight related to the relationship with not parties as stakeholder and data collection in your country as well. And if you give us your ideas on how your country is facing the challenges of collecting data from private companies. How South Africa is doing this?
Thank you, Jenny. And my surname is Motwanedi. And I apologize for being late. South Africa was presenting at the facilitative sharing of views, and we happened to be last on the presenters list, so that's why I came late. So in South Africa, we have a very robust process for engaging non-party stakeholders. Everything that we do in South Africa, we always make sure that we consult the public and we get the endorsement from the public. For an example, when we introduced the mandatory greenhouse gas reporting regulations in South Africa, before they were promulgated in 2017, we took them through a robust public consultation process where we were inviting all the data providers that we have on our systems, as well as the additional ones, and took them through the draft mandatory reporting regulations. And we had to get some inputs from them. And that is when afterwards we were able to officially get them approved by cabinet, as well as officialize them. In South Africa, we operate through a principle called Batho-Pele, which means people first. So anything that needs cabinet approval in South Africa will not even get the slightest approval if it didn't go through robust public consultation process where the government can prove how the public was consulted and non-party stakeholders were consulted, what inputs they made, and how those inputs were addressed. In terms of what were the challenges faced with data collection, with regards to our inventory, before we had the mandatory reporting regulations, we were collecting data on the inventory on an ad hoc basis, and this was creating some serious challenges for South Africa. We would have some data gaps on our inventory. Some of the data would not even come in the format that we would like it to come in. And if you would imagine submitting BUR every 2 years and not having consistent reporting by the data providers was also creating some serious challenges for South Africa. So since the promulgation of the reporting regulations, we've had industry report on a mandatory basis on their annual emissions. In the beginning, we were using a template, which was an offline tool, but with time we managed to improve and have an online system of reporting. That has really helped, and that has also helped with the improvement of the quality of our inventory, and has also helped us to update our inventory on a regular basis. So at least every 2 years, in line with the BUR cycle, we have been trying to update our inventory. Of course, we do have some of the challenges with some of the data providers not being compliant, but we always make effort to meet with the data providers that are not being compliant and try to understand what their challenges are, and then try to find a common way that we can work together. We have also published the guidelines that help industry and guide them on how to report on their emissions depending on the listed activities. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sandra, for your insight. I would like to ask you one question to all of you. From your own perspective, what approaches can be taken to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes for both government and private companies? How do you think it is better to get the government to approach private companies, or other side, like from the private sector to approach the government? Please, let's start with Miriam.
I think there is no size fits all response to that. But as we are here talking mostly to parties and how they could aggregate non-party stakeholders' data into their transparency process, I would say see this as an opportunity, see this as a benefit, and count on the knowledge that is out there with several organizations such as CDP, the World Business Council, and everything else to support you on that task that might seem new and far away and in the daily basis of a government, but there is knowledge out there that can be connected and integrated.
Thank you, Miriam. Luis?
I think I would say something very similar. I think there's an incredible amount of work that has been done by a really close-knit ecosystem of organizations on target setting, transition planning, reporting and disclosing, all of which can be fed into party efforts. So I would encourage parties in the room and elsewhere to engage with us in dialogue. You know, the World Business Council has a membership of 220 of the world's largest companies. You know, these are the companies with the capacity to do this on a corporate side. There will definitely be lessons learned that could be translated for parties too. So, you know, I would say do engage with us in dialogue, and we can work together. I think, you know, it was Gao who earlier said that actually, you know, by strengthening partnerships, we can foster collaboration. And I think that's a kind of a real key point, that it goes both ways. So, you know, I would say absolutely, you know, engage with us and learn the lessons, and likewise, we can do the same.
Thank you. I would like to ask also Victoria, if you can give us your opinion, please.
Thank you. I think it's important to engage in a dialogue between the government and the private sector, and explain to the private sector how the government is going to use data that is provided for the national policy making. And explain that national policy making creates the framework for the private sector within which it operates. So the better data, the better the analysis, the more cost-effective evidence-based policies are designed that are not only ambitious but also cost-effective for the private sector to implement, and realistic to implement. So it's in the interest of the private sector to provide this data to the government. Otherwise, policies may be unrealistic, that would create wrong incentives or wrong disincentives for the private sector to operate, and then it can distort the functioning of the private sector and access to markets, access to resources, etc. So it's important to have this dialogue and to have this explanation. And this will facilitate access to data, because the private sector will see the benefit for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And Sandra, please.
Thank you, Jenny. I would also agree that I think it works both ways. It's important for government to take the initiative in involving the private sector, because if we are having climate change targets and we're going to be having to achieve them, we cannot do that alone. So if we approach them in a manner of explaining that we need to work together towards achieving a common goal, then it becomes much better. And when you make the private sector a part of your family, you talk to them like they are your family, like you are all working together towards a common goal, then they become more receptive to sharing their data with the government. Equally, it's also important for the private sector also to take the initiative to talk to the government. I mean, in South Africa, we have a very, very active private sector. At the moment, we compile the inventory and publish it for public comments. We get a lot of comments, most of them feeling that sometimes maybe we are actually overestimating emissions. So it shows you that this two-way approach actually works. And also, you do not want, as the government, to always come across as always giving instructions, regulations, and all of that, without actually considering how the impact is also on the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you all. I think it is very, very important, the point that you mentioned, that including private sector is a way to validate policies in the countries. I mean, short-term policies is not a good way to do climate policy, because it's a long-term problem. So including a private sector in the very beginning of designing policies and in the gathering information as well is a way to validate and to make them part of the solution. So I think is the best approach that parties can be take with this sector. I don't know if you have some questions to each other. I would like to encourage to have maybe an open dialogue here, and if not, we can take some questions for the audience. I don't know. If first, I would like to ask you if you want to know something about, I don't know, CDP or maybe the South Africa. I don't know. No?
Yeah, maybe audience.
Okay, so we are now opening the floor to the audience, please.
My name is Ruth Spencer. I'm a local community representative from Antigua and Barbuda. Your term non-state party seems to be focusing just on the private sector. I don't hear nothing about the people who these processes are to support. You're from Chile, so you should know about the Escazú Agreement. I heard all the ambitions, plans from your government to include the local people, participate, bring them into decision-making processes. And your reporting will not be correct if you don't include the actions at the community level. In my country, it's the local community groups that are taking the actions. Many times, the very private sector, they're doing more harm to the economy. So I just want to bring you back to the place where the local groups on the ground must be included in all these processes, and parties must ensure that the data from them, I do the case studies for my groups, I get them published, I know what's going on. I'm doing a proposal now for one on waste, and he sent me all the data for all the exports of metals he's doing through his company. So unless we really include the local people, our reporting is going to be insufficient. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will. Thank you for your comment. I only want to say that in the case that the examples that we mentioned today, it was very focused on GHG emissions and mitigation actions. But of course, I really agree with you that, for example, in adaptation term, it's really important the data that we can that the local communities can provide, because they are the real people that are being affected by climate change and the impact of climate change. So when we are talking about, for example, climate change strategies, long-term strategies, and in the adaptation part, it's really important to have all the stakeholders in the table and listen to the opinion, not only private sector, government sector, academia, but also local communities, because it's there where the impact is seen. So I want to apologize if we not mentioned this in this event, but it was only because we were focused on GHG emissions. Another question we have there?
Two here.
Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and I was wondering if any of your organisations are working to pair your climate metrics with health metrics as well, because like to help with supporting agendas, because for example there are lots of climate mitigation actions which have health co-benefits, and they can be really useful in kind of giving extra support to for other organisations and parties and governments to take action.
Hello, sorry. Marco Billi from the Center for Climate Resilient Research in Chile and the Climate Champions. Just wanted to ask, and thank you very much for all the explanation, it was very clear. I wanted to ask if the experience in making more transparency and credibility that it has been had with all these experiences, what are the challenges and also lessons learned that you can find for now advancing to do the same kind of transparency and disclosure for adaptation, following up to the previous question? Thanks.
Thank you for your question. We would like to, okay, one more, and then, we are answering this first, and then we will take some new question. I would like to, I don't know, maybe from the side of the government, how you are, Sandra or Victoria, are taking information in health as the first question was mentioned. I don't know if you can answer this.
This is a very important question, and the Ministry of Environment deals with environment, but I would like to invite to share any ideas that we may consider, because this is a dialogue that it's not only us to respond on what we are doing, but also hear what else can we do in order to support better action, more comprehensive action. So if there are any concrete ideas, I would like to invite to share with us, and maybe we'll have a discussion of these ideas and think about our work program for the next year to integrate some of the ideas that you mentioned. Because we don't look at all the synergies, we don't look at all the nexuses across all sectors. In the government, everybody has their own mandate. But I see that there are some benefits of doing actions on the nexus. So if there are good ideas, we're happy to take them on board.
Thank you for that question. Just also to report what we had reported in our fourth BUR that we were presenting just now in the FSV. We looked at the different mitigation actions and some of the core benefits from implementing those mitigation actions. And of course, improvement of air quality is one of those core benefits, which is also on its own a health core benefit. So as South Africa, we have taken a pledge to also focus more on the core benefits of the mitigation actions other than reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases. And we think we can go a long way approaching it this way. Of course, there's still a lot of work to be done to be working with the different organizations, including the Department of Health, and as well as the public and the private sector in this regard. But we feel that we could do a whole lot of good work by assessing the core benefits and not just focusing on the GHG reduction impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Maybe Miriam and Luis, the second question, please.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to start reacting, telling that, as Jenny said, the climate agenda has many layers. We are zooming just one layer. It doesn't mean that the others are not, does not matter. On the contrary, they matter as much as the one that we are doing here. In terms of health, it's important to tell that CDP collects data not only from the private sector, but also from subnational governments. 2 years ago, we launched a report in Brazil when around 200 cities in Brazil disclosed their risks and opportunities and climate action and adaptation plans and everything else. And we analyzed the co-benefits and the risks in terms of health for the Brazilian cities related to climate change. It was a topic that we thought, is there going to be interest? And it received a lot of media coverage, and cities were very happy to see how their climate data could be used also for other thematics such as health. So I think there is appetite for that, and there is a way also of connecting CDP data to that. In terms of adaptation, which was the second question, we also have this very strongly in our cities and states and regions questionnaire and how we produce analysis about adaptations and risks of subnational governments, and also the climate finance needs for those governments to adapt. We know there is a big barrier, especially in the global south, in terms of the needs of climate finance for cities.
I mean, I might just pick up very briefly on the second question around, challenges and lessons learned from mitigation, how they're applied to adaptation, looking at the performance and accountability system that I presented earlier. We look at that system as something that could almost provide the bedrock or the foundation for how the private sector is then reporting on, nature disclosure, for example, and then, even further into things like products and materials and circularity. And I think that, they all have adaptation implications for the private sector. So we definitely see what we're currently developing for carbon and for greenhouse gas emissions reductions as something that can be applied almost as a foundational system that companies can follow for things like nature disclosure and so on and so forth. So absolutely, I think we're looking at how the progress that has already been made, and it's been good progress, can be translated into other areas of sustainability disclosure.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Maybe we have time for one brief question, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting. I come from the tech field, from the data science field, and we, in my sector, we use to say what cannot be measured, cannot be improved. So my question is, how do you manage data biases? Because you are collecting data from different areas, public sector, private sector, civil society. And my second question is, what is the top 3 areas in which you find more data gaps currently? Thank you so much.
Maybe again, yeah.
I can take. So you asked top 3 areas for data gaps. I can just give you one, which is looking specifically at Scope 3 emissions. So at the moment for corporates, Scope 3 emissions is largely reported at an entity level as opposed to a product level, and that is that's a real issue, because I think you've said it. We have a similar saying, which is you can't manage what you can't measure. So if you don't necessarily have that Scope 3 emissions data on a product level, you're not going to be able to direct emissions reductions in the right way. And there's a lot of work that is being done specifically by a group called the Partnership for Carbon Transparency that is really looking into developing effectively an exchange network for that product level data, because it's often, if you think of a corporate supply chain, it can have hundreds of suppliers within it, and they're all exchanging different, for one product, they're all kind of, feeding in different elements of that product, whether it be a plastic bottle or, whatever. So they're really looking at how they can develop that data exchange network, almost provide the kind of the guardrails for data exchange on a product level for Scope 3, and how that effectively can then become an accounting standard that companies can use in order to report on their Scope 3 emissions data. They've started an implementation program this year, which I think, since we're in the sort of implementation phase of the Paris Agreement, I think was a good mirroring from that group. And they're really looking at a couple of things. They're looking at how they can roll out that network effectively to corporates, and they're also working with a number of companies and organizations already in the ecosystem to roll out that network. CDP, for example, is already working towards alignment of the accounting standard that the Partnership for Carbon Transparency has put out. And likewise, there are individual corporates like SAP who are starting to build products that other corporates can use based off that information to provide their Scope 3 information, so as part of their kind of regular reporting and disclosing. So for us, it's absolutely the big gap is on Scope 3 emissions.
Answering on the bias of data, we are talking about voluntary disclosure here. So there might be those companies that are already willing to be transparent, but we feel we have a mandatory disclosure policies nationally, then we would have the entire picture of what is going on. So I think mandatory disclosure can be a further policy to increase the transparency as well.
Thank you both, and thank you for the question of the audience. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will have a brief exercise with Mentimeter, and we would like to, if you can scan, please, the code, because we wanted to have your insight and your feedback on how the CGE can focus its activities for 2024. So please enter to the Mentimeter. We are waiting to see the results. Just patience. Well, it seems like a horse ride. How did you hear about the side event? This is easier. Okay, since we have to ask to the CGE website and be more engaged. And did the side event meet your expectation? Oh. We will try to do our best next time. We promise. Fourth question. Apart from this side event, have you attended any other CGE capacity building events, online courses, or used any CGE guides and material? This is very important because, as Victoria mentioned in her presentation, there's a lot of material in CGE website that you can use for not only for reporting, but also for capacity building. So we encourage all of you to have a look on this material. Fifth question: are the CGE activity and material helpful? Okay. I think there's agreement here. How do you like this side event and other CGE activities and material? What works? Okay, this is an open question, so you can answer your main ideas here. And which option do you find most impactful? Participants can choose multiple options from there. Technical document, regional workshop, webinar, side event, and other. We will have many of them. So pick one or two or three. Interesting. Topic of interest for CGE support. All topics are very important. And is it tracking? Well. So I have to say that there are a lot of questions here, and there's a survey, so you can also leave your comments, and we will have some of this information later. So because I want to use the time we have left to give the floor to my colleague Gonzalo Huayquil. He's from Chile, but also he is the SBI's Vice Chair. So thank you, Gonzalo, to be here, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jenny, and good afternoon. Well, this is my first time in the transparency crew, and I've been the last 2 days quite involved. I had to facilitate the FSB, and now I'm here, like hearing how you put actually input to the BURs, the NatComs. So everything is really connected, really related, and it's wonderful to be present in this side event. Data collection is crucial. I mean, we all agree on that to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. And with the enhanced transparency framework that serves as a cornerstone, enable us to track progress, evaluate effectiveness of climate actions, and build mutual trust. And I think the colleague that made me comment about the local governments, local communities, she has the point that all and different actors have to contribute to the climate action. So, of course, this side event was focused on GHG emissions, but as Jenny rightly pointed out, there are other areas that we also need data. We have gaps at the moment, and we need to fulfill them. Because of that, transparency is not just a technical requirement, it's a fundamental element for effective climate action, as I said before. It allows us to assess the collective impacts of our efforts, identify areas for improvement, and ensure accountability. And I will stress the word accountability. I mean, now that we're going from the phase from negotiation to implementation, accountability is key. And not only for parties, but also for non-state parties. We have, for example, the climate action agenda, and we need to try to grasp and capture what all the parties and non-party stakeholders are doing to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. I would like to express sincere gratitude to the Consultative Group of Experts for organizing the event and for their commitment, tireless efforts, and monumental contributions in supporting developing countries in their journey to an enhanced transparency framework. Most of the countries that now are presenting the BIR and the NatComs are now trying to understand how the new framework is going to be done. I heard wonderful presentations in the FSB, and here I have my colleagues from South Africa, for example. We were just together in the morning session, and they were also talking and explaining what are the challenges facing from one framework to the next one. The next one is going to be quite comprehensive, and for that we need the resources not only from the parties, but also from all the non-state parties involved. To that, in collection and managing data for transparency is essential, as highlighted during our discussions today. Your engagement and participation are crucial for driving progress towards our climate goals. As we conclude this event, I encourage all participants to carry forward the momentum and continue working together. Let us seize the opportunity presented by the Enhanced Transparency Framework to ensure collective action and support. With that, I will close the event. I wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gonzalo, and thank you, everyone, to be here today for your attention. And of course, we are waiting for your feedback. And please take the survey, and we will see you very soon. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.